The brine-stung wind tore at the collar of my worn jacket, a constant, biting companion. Beneath my boots, the deck of the fishing boat at sea during transfer shuddered with the engine's rhythmic thrum, a dull percussion against the vast, indifferent expanse of the ocean. Salt spray kissed my face, sharp and cold, tasting of rust and distant horizons. My fingers, accustomed to the delicate click of a trigger or the precise turn of a lockpick, now grappled with the coarse knot of a net, securing a cargo that was neither fish nor entirely legal. This was my world now, the liminal spaces, the quiet trades, the shadows where the law's long arm grew conveniently short. The past, a jagged shard of glass, remained lodged deep within, an unhealed wound that throbbed with every creak of the hull, every lonely seagull cry. It was the echo of a case, a single, devastating failure, that had stripped me of my badge, my reputation, my very identity, leaving me with only the cynical husk of who I once was. The sea offered a kind of bleak absolution, its endless gray mirroring the landscape of my own soul. It allowed me to forget, for brief, blessed moments, the suffocating weight of what I'd lost. The sky, a canvas of bruised purples and grays, promised an early storm. I watched the distant, glittering sprawl of the city, a constellation of artificial stars that held no warmth for me. It was a place of gilded towers and forgotten alleyways, where power brokers moved like sharks in a silent, predatory ballet. I had once believed in its justice, now, I merely observed its hypocrisy. A vibration startled me, not from the boat, but from the pocket of my jacket. My burner phone, a relic of my current profession, glowed with an incoming message. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Calls rarely brought good news, especially not to me. Most often, they brought more shades of gray, more compromises. Yet, a morbid curiosity, a professional reflex that refused to die, compelled me. I swiped. The text was short, clipped, from an encrypted number I recognized, a number belonging to an old contact, a detective I'd once respected, who now operated in the upper echelons of the city's intelligence apparatus. My jaw tightened. He knew better than to bother me. Thorne. Dead. Downtown penthouse. Call me. The words hit me with the force of a rogue wave. Elias Thorne. The name alone conjured images of gleaming tech campuses, philanthropic galas, and the kind of visionary ambition that built empires. He was the city's golden boy, the beloved CEO whose innovations promised to reshape the future, a titan whose public image was as unblemished as polished glass. His death wasn't just a murder, it was an earthquake, a seismic shift in the city's carefully constructed facade. I felt a familiar, unwelcome tightening in my gut, the ghost of an old hunger. The world had gone quiet around me, the roar of the ocean momentarily muted by the clamor in my head. The solitude of the sea suddenly felt suffocating, a cage I had built for myself. My finger hovered over the contact's number. I could ignore it. Let the city's finest, the ones who had so eagerly discarded me, handle their own mess. But Thorne's death, I knew, wouldn't be a simple street crime. This was a high-stakes game, played in boardrooms and backrooms, far from the reach of uniformed officers. And the mention of his penthouse, a fortress of security and opulence, hinted at something far more sinister than a random act of violence. The phone rang, its insistent buzz cutting through the wind's lament. It was the contact. I sighed, a long, weary exhalation that tasted of salt and resignation, and answered. "You're out of my mind," I growled, my voice rough against the wind's howl. "I'm retired. Disgraced. Remember?" User RH, his voice was a low rumble, devoid of his usual bureaucratic polish. "This isn't just another case. It's different." They're all different until the body count climbs and the political fallout starts, I countered, bitterness lacing my words. What makes this one so special? Did he finally cross the wrong venture capitalist? A pause, heavy with unspoken details. He wasn't shot, user RH, or stabbed. No blunt force trauma. They found him suspended from the chandelier in the center of his living room. His eyes were open. And his hands. His hands were tied with a complex knot, one that a sailor would know. A specific kind of knot. And there were no signs of forced entry. No struggle. Nothing. The reveal is, it looks like he let his killer in. The detail, the sheer theatricality of it, pricked at something dormant within me. Suspended from a chandelier? A sailor's knot? No forced entry? It wasn't just a murder, it was a statement, a macabre piece of performance art. It reeked of calculated precision, of a message meant to be seen, to be understood by someone specific. This wasn't the work of a random psychopath. This was deliberate. Planned. And it tasted like the kind of puzzle that used to consume me, the kind that had ultimately destroyed me. The tension in the air was palpable, a live current humming between us across the choppy sea. My mind, against my will, was already piecing together the bizarre scene, discarding conventional motives, seeking the unseen threads. The old contact knew me too well. He knew what kind of bait I couldn't resist. The official line will be suicide, or a disgruntled employee. But I know better. I know better. This feels like the beginning of something much larger. Something that could unravel a lot of carefully constructed lies. I gripped the phone tighter, my grip tight. The wind seemed to mock my attempts at detachment. The waves crashed against the hull, a relentless rhythm of inevitability. I was a moth to a flame, a predator drawn to the scent of blood, even when I knew it might be my own. The city, with its glittering promise and its festering secrets, called to me. The fishing boat, the endless gray, suddenly felt like a prison. Don't tell me you're asking for my help, after everything, I said, the words a challenge, a plea, a warning. I'm asking I to look, he replied, his voice firm. Just look. Before they make sure there's nothing left to see. I closed my eyes, picturing Thorne, suspended, a puppet on a string, his unseeing eyes staring into the opulence of his own demise. My past was a phantom limb, always aching, and Thorne's bizarre end had just rubbed salt into the old wound. I opened my eyes, the city lights now burning brighter, drawing me in. The fishing boat bucked, a final protest against my departure. Fine, I muttered, the word a reluctant surrender. Tell me where the dock is. And don't expect me to play nice. The image of Thorne, a puppet of death in his own gilded cage, clung to me like sea mist, chilling and persistent. It was a mirror, distorted yet undeniable, to the case that had carved the canyon of my disgrace. The public spectacle, the private terror, a familiar, bitter alchemy. Then, the insistent buzz of the burner phone, a discordant note in the quiet hum of my self-imposed exile. I let it vibrate, a small defiance, before finally answering. User RH, I stated, my voice a gravelly echo in the sparse confines of my office. They're calling it a message, the voice on the other end said, clipped and urgent. It was the precinct contact, a ghost from my former life, his words always wrapped in the scent of stale coffee and desperation. Thorne. The how of it. It's got the brass spooked. Too clean, too theatrical. But they want it closed, fast. They're already leaning towards a disgruntled rival, some corporate hitman. A sigh escaped me, heavy with the weight of expectation I hadn't asked for. And you want me to dance in the margins? Pick up the crumbs the official boots miss? You always did see the pattern in the scatter, he countered. A hint of steel in his tone. This one. It feels like it's got your name on it, user RH. The same intricate cruelty. Something's off. I can feel. It in my gut. The hook was set, deep and barbed. He knew my weakness, the morbid fascination with the unseen mechanics of human malevolence. My reluctance warred with a primal itch, a need to untangle the knotted threads of a carefully woven lie. Send me what you have. Anything unofficial. The scraps. He promised to funnel me what he could, a trickle of information against the flood of official narrative. I spent the next few hours steeped in the cacophony of public opinion and the bland pronouncements of the authorities. News reports painted Thorne as a titan, felled by an unseen hand. The police spokesperson spoke of a swift investigation, a targeted individual, no wider threat. Too neat. Too simple. The official story, a carefully constructed edifice, already felt like it was hiding cracks. My gaze lingered on a grainy, leaked photograph from the crime scene, a digital ghost smuggled from the precinct contact's phone. The clarity was poor, yet one detail snagged my attention, a subtle dissonance in the macabre tableau. The knot. Not the simple, brutal noose one might expect from a killer's rage, but something else. Intricate. Deliberate. A complexity that felt out of place, almost artistic in its execution, if one could ascribe artistry to such an act. It hummed with a quiet menace, a signature whispered in chord intention. I sketched it, painstakingly, on a pad of paper, the lines of my pencil mirroring the twisted fibers. It was a specific kind of knot, I felt it in my bones, but my memory, dulled by years away from the sharp edges of active duty, failed to name it. I called the precinct contact again, my voice low. The knot. Any specifics on the knot used to suspend Thorne? A pause, heavy with unspoken warnings. Standard ligature, user RH. Nothing unusual in the report. Why? It's not standard, I insisted, my eyes still fixed on my sketch. It's too precise. Too professional. Get me someone who knows ropes. Someone from the docks, maybe. Retired longshoreman. Spends his days down at Pier 17. Sits on a bench, whittles. Goes by the Mariner. Says he's seen every knot known to man and some known only to the deep. You'll find him near the fishing boat at sea during transfer. It's a relic, stays docked for repairs mostly, but he likes the view. The lead felt like a whisper in a hurricane, but it was a lead nonetheless. I drove down to the docks, the air thick with brine and diesel. The fishing boat at sea during transfer was exactly as described, a weather-beaten vessel with peeling paint, its hull scarred by countless voyages. It listed slightly, held fast by thick, salt-encrusted ropes. On a nearby bench, a figure sat, gnarled hands working a piece of driftwood. The Mariner? I asked, approaching slowly. He looked up, eyes like chips of blue ice, ancient and knowing. Depends on who's asking, and why. I produced my sketch, laying it on the weathered bench between us. This knot. You know it? His gaze sharpened, falling upon my drawing. He picked it up, his thumb tracing the intricate loops and twists. A low whistle escaped his lips, a sound like wind through rigging. I know it. Not one for show, this. It's a variation of a hangman's hitch, yes, but woven through with a fisherman's bend, tightened with a reef knot's precision. We call it the widow's grip in some circles. Used for securing heavy cargo in rough seas, or for hoisting a mast that's come loose in a gale. Takes a lifetime of hands-on work to get it that tight, that clean. Not a knot you tie in a hurry, or in a fit of passion. My breath caught. The official story of a quick, brutal act of vengeance dissolved like sea foam. This wasn't a random killer. The Mariner's words, delivered with the quiet authority of experience, were the first true inconsistency, the crucial, overlooked detail. The case wasn't just complex, it was orchestrated. And I, user RH, was now firmly caught in its intricate, deadly web. The tension in my gut tightened, a familiar, unwelcome companion wound in his temple. No struggle, just as Ramirez had said. It looked like he'd been reading, a leather-bound volume still clutched loosely in his hand. "The weapon?" I asked, my voice low. Ramirez gestured to a small, silver-plated pistol on a velvet display stand, carefully bagged. "Found on the floor near his hand. Registered to Thorne. Looks like a suicide, but the ME isn't buying it. Powder residue inconsistent with a self-inflicted wound. Plus, the book he was reading? A first edition of The Art of War. Open to a page about deception. Not exactly a suicide note." I knelt, ignoring the glares of a uniformed officer. My eyes, trained by years of searching for the unseen, swept over the scene. The room was immaculate, almost sterile. Bookshelves lined with rare editions, awards gleaming on a mantelpiece, a state-of-the-art security panel near the door. Too perfect. "No forced entry, you said?" "None." The security system was armed. Only Thorne and his closest staff had access codes. His wife was out of town. I peered at the security panel. It was a high-end, bespoke system, the kind that cost more than my entire building. A small, almost imperceptible smudge marred the pristine surface of one of the keypads, near the enter button. It wasn't a fingerprint, just a faint, greasy residue, like someone had touched it with a gloved hand, then quickly wiped it, but not perfectly. "This system," I muttered, "it's designed to be impenetrable. Biometrics, rotating codes, silent alarms. If someone entered, they had to have Thorne's specific access. Or they were already inside." Ramirez knelt beside me. "The staff are being questioned. All accounted for. No one saw anything." "Of course not." I stood, my gaze lingering on the book. The Art of War. Deception. A message? My eyes drifted to Thorne's hand. The grip was loose, unnatural. The book was a prop, but what kind? And for whom? "What's that?" I pointed to a small, almost invisible indentation on the edge of Thorne's desk, right where his left elbow would have rested. It was a shallow, the mariner's words, delivered with the quiet authority of one who knew the sea's secrets, had spoken of a specific knot, a fisherman's bend, tied with a grace only a true seaman would possess, he'd said, but in the wrong hands, a sign of a message. My breath caught. This was someone with skill, with patience, with a specific, chilling message embedded in the very fabric of Thorne's demise. A specific knot. A seaman's touch. The pieces, though scattered, began to coalesce into a crude image in my mind. Thorne, the tech titan, drowned in a bathtub, then carefully placed in the river, bound with a knot that whispered of the ocean. The incongruity was a beacon. I spent the next hours sifting through Thorne's past, not for enemies in boardrooms, but for those who understood the rhythm of the tides. My old contact, a grizzled dockworker with eyes that saw more than they let on, provided the first real lead. He remembered Thorne's recent, contentious dismissal of his head of security, a former Coast Guard officer known for his meticulous nature and an almost obsessive attention to detail, particularly regarding maritime safety protocols. Let's call him the security chief. The security chief, I discovered, had harbored a festering resentment, dismissed over a minor infraction that felt disproportionately severe. He had the skill, the motive, and a sudden, inexplicable windfall that had allowed him to acquire a small, beat-up trawler just weeks before Thorne's death. The vessel, a rust-streaked relic, was registered under a shell company, a flimsy veil I easily pierced. This man was my killer. I tracked the security chief for 2 days, a phantom in the city's periphery. He moved with a practiced anonymity, slipping through fish markets and forgotten marinas. He made no grand gestures, no panicked flights, just a quiet settling of affairs, a slow, deliberate winding down. It was the calm before the storm, or so I believed. My evidence, though circumstantial, felt like a tightening net, the specific knot, his. Maritime background, the sudden wealth, the calculated dismissal, his recent purchase of a boat. It all pointed to him, a disgruntled employee exacting a precise, vengeful retribution. The day came when I moved to close the trap. The security chief had arranged what appeared to be a clandestine meeting, a transfer of goods, or perhaps, an escape. I found him on a fishing boat at sea during transfer, the vessel bobbing gently in the churning gray-green expanse of the bay. The air was thick with the scent of brine and diesel. He stood by the stern, his back to me, watching the distant city skyline shrink. The lines of his shoulders were tense, but his posture held a strange, almost defiant stillness. "Planning a long trip?" I asked, my voice cutting through the wind's low moan. He didn't startle, just slowly turned, his face a landscape of weathered lines. His eyes, though weary, held no surprise. "User RH," he acknowledged, his voice raspy, like sand on stone. "I expected I sooner." I stepped closer, the deck swaying beneath my feet. The fisherman's bend. A nice touch. Too bad you're the only one I know with that particular signature. I laid out my carefully constructed case, piece by agonizing piece, the dismissal, the resentment, the specific knot, the boat, the sudden cash injection. I watched his face for any flicker of denial, any desperate plea of innocence. Instead, a slow, bitter smile spread across his lips. "You're a good investigator, User RH," he conceded, his voice devoid of anger, almost detached. "Yes. I did it. Thorne deserved it. He ruined me, cast me aside like refuse. I simply returned the favor." His confession was direct, unembellished. The case, I thought, was closed. The killer found. But I only found the hand, User RH. Not the one who pulled the string. The words hit me like a rogue wave, washing away my momentary victory. "What are I talking about?" He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I think I just decided to drown him on a whim. I think I bought this boat with my pension." Thorne had enemies far more powerful than a disgraced security chief. I was a tool, a convenient instrument. They promised me protection, a new life. They told me where, and how. They even provided the incentive. He gestured vaguely towards the distant shore, towards the glittering spires of the city that now seemed to mock my certainty. Politicians, corporate titans. The real power brokers. They wanted Thorne gone, and they wanted it to look like a simple, personal vendetta. My mind reeled. A pawn. I had caught the pawn. This was how it started last time. The carefully crafted narrative, the convenient fall guy, the unseen hand pulling the strings while I, the diligent detective, chased the wrong ghost. My career, my reputation, shattered by a conspiracy I had only glimpsed the edges of. The memory of that searing injustice, of being played for a fool, flared within me, hot and bitter. The security chief watched me, a flicker of pity in his eyes. "You're in deeper than I know, User RH. Much deeper. And they don't like loose ends." The wind howled, a mournful dirge. The city, once a symbol of justice, now seemed a sprawling, intricate web of deceit. Convenient scapegoat. But my gut, a seasoned veteran of betrayal, told me otherwise. The small impression on Elias Thorne's desk, I'd learned, perfectly matched the base of a high-frequency data transmitter, a prototype device Nexus Dynamics had been developing. A device designed for ultra-secure, short-burst data transfers. Why would Thorne have one on his desk, And why would it be removed so carefully after his death? It wasn't just a murder, it was a data heist. My investigation led me to Sarah, a former colleague from my police days, now a freelance tech consultant. He was a ghost in the machine, a whisper in the digital ether. She knew the undercurrents of the tech world, the rivalries, the unholy alliances.
Project Chimera, Sarah said, her voice a low hum over the encrypted line I insisted on using.
That's what Thorne was working on. Top secret, even for Nexus. Rumors were, it wasn't just about data, user RH. It was about influence. Behavioral algorithms, predictive analytics on a scale that would make Big Brother blush. The ability to subtly nudge public opinion, manipulate markets, even influence elections. Influence, I repeated, a chill creeping up my spine. It echoed the hushed whispers of my past, the Chimera incident that had ended my career. And that's where the sharks circle. There are at least 3 major players who would kill for that tech. The Viridian Group, a global conglomerate known for its aggressive takeovers. A rival tech giant, Omnicorp, always looking for an edge. And then it was a name I'd heard in hushed tones during the Chimera incident, a cabal of power brokers that had orchestrated my downfall. I'd never been able to prove their existence, let alone their involvement. My pursuit of information on Project Chimera led me to the fishing boat at sea during transfer pitched and rolled, a rhythmic cradle beneath a sky bruised with the last vestiges of twilight. Salt-laced air whipped through my hair, carrying the metallic tang of diesel and the mournful cry of gulls. Inside the cramped cabin, a single lamp cast a sickly yellow glow over the hacker's sweat-sheen face, illuminating the frantic dance of fingers across a keyboard. The hum of the generator was a dull counterpoint to the relentless click-clack, a frantic symphony of impending revelation. My gaze drifted from the hacker's intense concentration to the churning dark water outside the porthole, a liquid abyss mirroring the uncertainty within me. Thorne's final, encrypted fragments, a digital breadcrumb trail leading to the heart of this hydra, were almost within reach. I felt a cold dread settle in my gut, a premonition that this truth, once unearthed, would be heavier than any lie. My past, a constant phantom limb ache, whispered warnings of the cost of such knowledge. Almost there, user RH, the hacker murmured, voice tight with strain, eyes glued to the scrolling lines of code. One more layer. This is intricate. Whoever built this wall knew what they were protecting. The boat lurched, sending a stack of worn charts sliding across a table. I steadied them with a hand that trembled slightly, a tremor I hoped the hacker didn't notice. This wasn't about a single CEO, it was about the very sinews of power. Got it. The final key. It's embedded in a temporal lock, tied to a specific data stream from Thorne's personal server. Clever, but not impenetrable. The screen flickered, then burst into a cascade of data, names, and schematics. My breath caught in my throat. The hacker leaned back, wiping a hand across their brow, exhaustion etched into every line of their face. User RH. Project Chimera, the name stood out, stark and terrifying. It wasn't a product, not a service. It was a framework, a global infrastructure designed to manipulate information, control resources, and ultimately, dictate narratives on an unprecedented scale. There was the financial magnate, whose philanthropic endeavors masked a predatory grip on emerging markets. The media baron, whose empire shaped public opinion with surgical precision. And others, their faces grimly familiar from the periphery of power, now exposed at the epicenter of this monstrous design. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just clearing my name, it was about preventing a quiet, insidious takeover of the world. The stakes had been brutally, irrevocably raised. They were using Thorne's company, his innovations in data processing, as the backbone for this, the hacker explained, pointing to a complex flowchart. I had to expose them, but how? The evidence, though damning, was digital. Against such entrenched power, it would be dismissed as fabrication, a conspiracy theory spun by a disgraced detective. I needed an analog anchor, a physical manifestation of their depravity, or a voice powerful enough to echo mine. My mind raced, sifting through the dregs of my former life, the dangerous contacts I'd sworn I'd never revisit. One name surfaced, a man who moved in the grayest of areas, a fixer with a network of eyes and ears in places polite society dared not tread. He was a viper, but sometimes, only a viper could strike another. "I need to make a call," I said, my voice hoarse, the words tasting like ash. The hacker looked at me, understanding dawning in their eyes. They knew the kind of people I'd have to reach out to. The risks. "User RH, are I sure?" they asked, a note of warning in their tone. "This man. He doesn't work for free, and his debts are paid in blood, not coin." "I'm sure," I replied, the determination solidifying. There was no turning back now. The wind outside howled, a rising crescendo. The fishing boat at sea during transfer continued its journey through the choppy waters, carrying not just me, but the fate of a world teetering on the precipice of silent subjugation. I pulled out my burner phone, the cheap plastic feeling heavy in my hand. The number I punched in was old, almost forgotten, etched into a corner of my memory I usually kept locked away. The ringtone echoed in the cramped cabin, a stark, unwelcome sound. My skin crawled with the knowledge that this call, this desperate gamble, would undoubtedly draw their attention, if it hadn't already. I was no longer merely hunting, I was the hunted, a lone wolf with a truth too dangerous to carry. The game had just begun. Everything. It's out there. A lie, he scoffed. We've purged every trace. But his voice held a flicker of doubt, a hairline crack in his composure. He knew I had downloaded something. He moved with a predator's grace, circling the server units. I heard the soft scrape of his shoes on the polished concrete. This wasn't just a hired thug, this was someone trained, someone dangerous. The air grew heavy with unspoken threats. I knew then, with a chilling certainty, that I was no longer just investigating a murder. I was fighting for my life, against an enemy I'd only ever glimpsed from the periphery. An enemy that had, once before, taken everything from me. My false victory came swiftly, a bitter pill coated in the illusion of justice. The guard Thorne, the demoted executive, was picked up by Ramirez's team, thanks to a carefully planted digital breadcrumb that led directly to him. The evidence, a fabricated email chain, a series of financial transactions funneled through offshore accounts, painted a compelling picture. He had motive, opportunity, and now, a mountain of circumstantial data. He cracked, "User RH, Ramirez told me over the phone," his voice laced with the weariness of a case closed, if not truly solved. "Confessed to the murder. Said Thorne was going to expose his insider trading, so he silenced him. Said he used his access to Nexus's internal systems to bypass security, then used Thorne's own gun to make it look like suicide. Fits all the pieces." "All the convenient pieces," I retorted, the words sharp with a frustration that gnawed at me. "It's too neat, Ramirez. Too perfect. The email chain? Too clean. The offshore accounts? A dead end. It's a ghost, not a body. A decoy. A confession is a confession, User RH. The brass are ecstatic. It's done. No, it's not." I could almost feel the weight of his skepticism through the line. Did he mention Project Chimera? The data transmitter? The impression on the desk? Just the insider trading. He's sticking to it. Says he panicked. He's a pawn, Ramirez. A well-placed, expendable pawn. Someone gave him the script, the evidence, and the incentive to take the fall. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. The guard Thorne's confession was a carefully constructed lie, a smokescreen designed to hide the true architects of Elias Thorne's demise. The cleaner at the server farm, the specific nature of Project Chimera. It all pointed to something far grander, far more sinister. My mind, however, wasn't fully on the guard Thorne. The mention of the conclave had ripped open an old wound. A vivid memory, sharp as glass, pierced through my defenses, the sterile interrogation room, the cold glint in the eyes of the internal affairs officer, the carefully leaked documents that painted me as a rogue agent, a paranoid conspiracy theorist. The Chimera incident wasn't just a bad case, it was a carefully orchestrated demolition of my career, my identity. I had been investigating a shadowy network of influential figures, a group I suspected was manipulating information, shaping events from behind the scenes. And then, just as I was getting close, the walls had closed in. My evidence vanished, my informants disappeared, and I was left holding the empty bag, my reputation in tatters. Now, the same name, the Conclave, resurfaced. Project Chimera, Thorne's work on influence and behavioral algorithms, was eerily similar to the technology I'd stumbled upon years ago. Thorne wasn't just developing a new project, he was either continuing, or attempting to expose, the very mechanisms of control that had destroyed me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Thorne's death wasn't just a murder, it was a continuation of my past. The stakes had just become terrifyingly personal. My own identity, the shattered fragments I'd tried to reassemble, was directly tied to this investigation. If I failed now, if I let them win again, what would be left of User RH? Just the ghost of a ghost. The city lights blurred into streaks of neon as I sped through.